Hi, everyone, and welcome back for our next conversation through Mentality Mondays, a healthy masculinity conversation series, a part of the Mentality Project. My name is Anthony Filiberto. I am the Assistant Director for Fraternity and Sorority Programs and also a co-lead for the Mentality Project. And today I'm very excited to have one of my dear friends, Tesha Hinton, as our guest speaker. And also with me today is my co-lead and wonderful co-host, Chelsea, and I will let her introduce herself.
Hey everyone, I'm Chelsea Hill. I use she and they pronouns. I'm one of the health promotion specialists here at the Well, specializing in sexual health, sexual violence prevention, and engaging men on campus. And I'm really excited to have Letitia here with us as well. So Letitia, could you please just introduce yourself by telling us a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do here at the Well?
Yes. Well, hi, friends. It's so good to be with you guys on Friday. Yes, I'm Tesha Hinton, and one of the assistant directors for the Well for Health Promotion. Currently, my focus areas are alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, and mental well-being. But what I take most pride in is overseeing the peer health education program, also known as the Tufts. That is my favorite part of the job for sure. I've been at Tulane for a little while, so I started off as a generalist, and I can cover all the topic areas that the Well covers. Little known fact, I was a graduate student here, and that's actually what changed my path to do this work. And so a lot of it is just helping students with their health and wellness and to get to the ultimate goal with graduation.
Awesome. Thank you. So we are here to talk about masculinity and the work that's being done at Tulane and just in life in general. So can you talk about how your work specifically intersects with healthy masculinity and violence prevention?
Absolutely, yeah. So like I said, I've been here for a while, so I saw the different creations of it. Definitely not a part of the team that created it, but was a part of the conversations in which we had to bring it here. And so I was lucky enough to do some training and see what other institutions or other peer institutions were doing in this area. It first started off for me as just learning about the different topic areas within when we're talking about masculinity, and then how that applies to the topic areas that I cover. So I think what it's mostly connected to me for me is the peer health education program. So because of the program Masculinity Project, we were able to create a coordinator position. And so one of our senior level tops found a lot of interest and is passionate about this work. And so we found the correlation between the peer-to-peer aspect of this and embedded that into our program.
Awesome, thank you so much. So let's dive some more into masculinity as well, because we'd love to get your perception. And we're wondering, do you still think there is an expectation in our society for males to adhere to masculine stereotypes or fit into the man box? You could talk about it from a societal perspective or what you have seen here at Tulane since you've been here for a couple years. So just wondering, what are your perceptions on masculinity here at Tulane?
Absolutely. So I think, personally, I would say the answer to that question is absolutely yes. I think that, I personally came from HBCU and then came to Tulane as a graduate student. And so I think I've seen it in different aspects. So I think in our society and also culturally for me, I think that there are some, it's still deep rooted in the way in which my generation and maybe even my culture looks at it a little bit. And I can think about it just from family views. And so I think what I've been seeing at Tulane, especially with the Mentality Project, is that we wanted to open the doors and the conversations around this to see where our students were. And I think that's the best part of being in college, is being able to explore different things and hear people's perspectives. I really enjoyed being a part of, and not even really be a part of, but just listening to those conversations to hear what our students feel or see on a regular basis with this topic, as well as breaking down what I think traditionally, kind of when we talk about the man box of what we've put those who are male identified or who are biologically born a male, how that breaks down in our society. And then I also just think about gender roles, right? I'm not that old, but I think that part of it, I'm that middle sweet spot of a generation. So I see what my mother, my aunts, and my grandmothers think about gender roles and what masculinity looks like, but also what I see from the younger generations, from my godchildren or the students here. And so I'm in this middle part. And so seeing how they switch over and also seeing how someone who might present as female but may have masculine roles. So I think there's just so many different facets to it that I think are still a part of our society, and it's definitely, I think, translatable to what I see at Tulane a little bit, if that answers the question. But I think it also goes back to the society too of it's very, very mixed, and it's there's multiple sides to this box. I think that traditionally we thought of it as just like a flat box, but I think of it more of like a cube, and there's more pieces. It's more dynamic than just this like I am this. But I think that's also true for those who identify as female. Like there's more to just that box as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love that you talked about how your experience at Tulane over the past 2 years, and seeing the evolution of these conversations happening. And I know you were a part of the WELL when specifically the Mentality Project was formed. So can you talk about like how you've seen the Mentality Project evolve from its beginning stages to where we are now, from your perspective?
Absolutely. Where I think it first began, like all the things that we do here at the WELL, was based in a public health model. We went out and did the research and found the evidence base on it. And then what that looked like for me personally was going to a conference. I remember going to NASPA, I believe it was either strategies or more of a general assembly, and literally going to multiple sessions on this topic and seeing what other schools were doing in this area. What I was seeing was there was conversations about essentially just talking about what it was, and asking students to reflect on how they see masculinity playing in their roles, even if they are a male identified person or a female identified person, or just a person in general, seeing how those play out there. And then a lot of those programs that I saw within that conference were also peer mentor or mentorship type programs. And so when we first started the program, I think that's where we thought we were going with it. And so Mentality had had 3 leads. One person was kind of in the background, and then we had 2 folks that were leading daily conversations for a very small cohort. I believe there was they met weekly for, I think, a half of semester, and they had different topics that they covered each time. And so they broke it down into like gender roles, then talked about the media. It was a very interesting concept for the cohort. From what I could see, I think our students at the time, we didn't engage with them that way because it was it was a lot of work to have the conversation every week. And then I think it morphed into where it is now, where I think the conversation is more dynamic because we're inviting everyone in Tulane to have the conversation. And so essentially it was kind of like a focus group, if you will, where there was topics that were covered, for example, like the man box, and having deep conversations about what that meant. It was also over lunchtime, so it seemed like it was more accessible to students. And if you had to choose between going to lunch or having this conversation, that also helped with that. And then having other student leaders, I think, is where we are now, kind of like a phase 3, if you will. We're now inviting our students to be a part of the conversation and create the content. And I think that just makes it even more powerful because, yes, sure, we could be the experts in this topic, but our students live this every day. And so they know better than we do sometimes how to connect to their peers. And so I'm really excited about where we are now because I think we're involving student leaders to have those conversations. And then maybe we can circle back to the mentorship program or additional focus groups. But I think inviting someone like our coordinator role to come and do that is a really exciting part of this phase of where we are in the project.
Absolutely. It's always so great to hear about the evolution of the project, especially as someone who's new to Tulane. And you made a point, which I think is a great segue into our next question, about giving the power to the students to create the content. And so I'm wondering if you can speak on what, in your eyes, what role does peer education play in providing information and resources to college students, and also how do you think the coordinator's role, our Magnus, how he plays a role also as well with working with the project?
Absolutely. I think that I would hope anybody who knows me knows that I love peer education. I, hands down, can't do anything in my job without them. I involve them in everything, in every aspect of my work. Sometimes I also wonder, what actually do I do? Because the students do so much. I think they have so much power. And I think that a part of what my role, I think, is when working with students is to empower them to do that. But I'm also a big person who likes to do things based on learning visually. And so I think this is an opportunity that if we involve the students in this process, not only are they talking about this topic, but they're taking away tangible life skills that they can take other places. And I think that the bigger part, some of those like soft skills are like conflict resolution and all of that. And so they can take things, having a conversation about this, and then apply it to maybe a more touchy subject, if they will. And so I think that some of the skill sets that they're learning and why peer education is so important is, one, what it's doing for the individual student that's being a part of it. We're shaping and molding them into being a good citizen and a good human in the world. And then they're also reflecting that and mirroring that into their peers on campus. And the reality is that, you know, like, especially when we're talking about like alcohol and other drugs, right? None of us are hanging out with our students in those spaces. And so if we put the power into them, they can be the ones who are the bystanders in this conversation. And I think bystander intervention can be applied to any topic. And so same thing with masculinity, right? Like, they're the ones who can stop someone in their tracks and make them rethink about a statement that they may have said, or to influence something in a classroom when they're learning about a certain topic area within this. And then they can basically make their peers' minds explode, get new ideas from these things. And so I think peer education, for me, literally can be rooted in any topic, and it has way more power than it would if just it was like a pro staff member or an expertise in this. And I think that's why I really led into having someone like Magnus come. So Magnus is a dynamic leader just in general on campus. He's involved in a lot of things, but also he has the passion behind it and the amount of work that he does in the research to do it. Like, you know, this isn't necessarily related to masculinity, but he rewrote our One Wave curriculum. That was all him. It was just like, here's the opportunity to do it. And we were able to foster that, right, as pro staff on how to do it. And I think that's the kind of power students can have if we allow them to do it. And I think that this is definitely for masculinity. I think it's limitless in what our possibilities are. I don't know what they are. I can't give you like tangible of like what they could do in the topic, but I think the more we empower them to do the research, they can come back to us and present it to us in ways that we would have never thought of. And so I think that's really, for me, the power of peer education and why it's so important to invest in our students so they can then invest in their peers and make our community a better place. And I think once we do that kind of stuff, that empowerment of our community will change so many things on our campus, because I think they then live and breathe it and they want to make their community better. And part of that is having different conversations or talking about different topics like this.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Magnus has been such like a huge factor in the work that we're able to do on a daily, weekly, semesterly basis. Like, the student perspective is important, right? And I think you touched on that, like, we aren't living the same experience as students. Exactly. The three of us, I can confidently say, like, we're not two like students, like undergraduate students. And like, I have no idea the dynamics of the students' daily lives here versus like my undergraduate career. They're vastly different, but like some things may be similar in like broad strokes. But yeah, Magnus has definitely brought in some great perspective of an undergraduate student and his experiences from freshman year, and now he's a senior. So we very much appreciate him. But there's also a piece that you talked about with, you attended the conferences through NASPA, which is one of our professional development organizations in higher education and student affairs. And I know you are extremely involved in that organization. So can you talk about like what you've seen or trends you might have noticed from other institutions doing healthy masculinity work in regards to just generalized healthy masculinity work versus like utilizing peer health education?
Well, I can say with definitely start to say, I don't remember in some of the trainings the conferences that I went to, I don't remember exactly a peer education model. And so I think that in itself says a lot. It lends itself well, but I also am curious why no one presented on that concept. What I did see, the two major themes I saw was, one was just basic education. And so a lot of schools were doing programming around it, not necessarily inviting large guest speakers in, but kind of having small group conversations, which I think is really important in this. But what I thought was notable in those conversations is some schools had it where it was by certain populations. So it might have been for male identified folks only, or it might have been an all call to everyone, which I think is very interesting. I also saw another difference with that was that it was also based on maybe some cultural things. So some of the schools that I went to did separate it. They were HBCU, so it was primarily for men of color. And that conversation may look different than those who are not men of color. And then the big piece that I saw from a lot of the universities, and maybe this was just where they were in the moment, was that mentorship program that I was talking about earlier. What I found was there was it was very dynamic in the way that they created them. They mostly had male identified folks running those programs, which I think was a very interesting piece. But I think most of what it was talking about was this part of mentorship and having intentional conversations, which appeared to be small groups, and having these like meetings, which I think lends itself to a peer education model. Even though they didn't call it that, they were doing group meetings, having conversations, and then doing events and outreach on their campuses. I haven't looked into a lot of it recently to see where those folks have moved to. I know that a lot of them have it like based on their websites that their programs are growing. And so they've, done like a one cohort model to having 2 or 3 in a semester, which I think is pretty amazing. But I haven't seen a lot of the work that we've been doing here necessarily at other schools. And then also I think there's a power of using some of the social media. I haven't seen a lot of schools that were posting this information either, which I think is interesting. So I think those are the main big themes that I saw from people. A lot of it seemed to be based on just education and small group conversations at first.
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's good to know that this work is relatively new, but also that Tulane is really being innovative, it sounds like, and creative in how we are doing our masculinity work. So it's a bit encouraging, but also like we have so much more work to do as well.
Right.
So talking more about our mentality project coordinator, that position is relatively new, it sounds like. And so we're wondering, like, how does the role of the coordinator function within the TUF program?
Absolutely. So I believe as of this year, Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, they're officially a part of the leadership team. I think last year we didn't have an exact title yet or job description within the TUF program. The way I kind of like to run the TUF program, to be honest with you, is I like to kind of feel some things out, and then I create job descriptions based off of that, because I think sometimes our students, we get stuck in the like, this is my job description. And so I like to see like where they can go and have them kind of create it with me. And so with the help of Anthony, we came up with this position. And so it is embedded as part of the leadership team, and that person has different roles. And so ultimately, what I hope the role is that they meet with Anthony as their supervisor, but then they bring that information back over to the TUF program. And it's not just about encouraging the TUFs to come and be at those events, but also to be helpers in creating that material. So I believe last semester or the semester before, the leadership conference, I was here at Tulane, a part of new student leadership programs. Magnus created, and I think Anthony together, they had 2 different workshops, I believe, were created within a part of this leadership program. And so our TUFs were encouraged to be a part of that so they could see what the mentality program was, what it looked like to be the coordinator. And so my hope is that, we're in the first stages of this coordinator role within the TUF program, that we can build upon that and make this another leadership opportunity within the TUF program to really be leaders in this conversation, and then to create bigger and better things on our campus in regards to this topic. So right now, I think a lot of it probably breaks down to just like, they have a supervisor, they're doing small tasks and creating presentations or focus groups and other events. And then they're right now is bringing most of the information straight back to the TUF program to educate their peers on it. But my hope is that eventually they will be able to maybe even create like a subcommittee from this, from the coordinator role, and create more materials. Maybe they can help with like things like this, right? Where they can come and interview people for you, or expand it somehow on social media. And so really just embedding them into the process. Maybe a podcast, who knows, right? So I think there's lots of opportunities that could come from having the coordinator be a part of it. And a lot of that, I think, for me this semester, we'll be talking to Magnus about what he enjoyed in his role, where he thinks the role can continue to go, and where he thinks the program can go in the future. A lot of the ways that I work with my leadership team or the TUFs in general, is I ask them to do a legacy project. And so For me, the legacy project is about leaving Tulane, leaving the tough program better than the way that you found it. And so I'll be asking Magnus, like, okay, so based on this position, what would be your legacy project from a mentality project? And so hopefully he will add to the tough program within this and make it a little bit better.
Absolutely. And yeah, the position is brand new, like created it. I know we've all had conversations about like why we needed a student point of view and like how helpful it would be to the staff members. Just an extra person working on this topic. But I'm wondering, like, what do you see as the benefits of having, you know, this role as a part of the tough program infused into it with, I wouldn't say they're specifically like new topics that we're like covering, but definitely infusing them more into the peer education model that y'all have created.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the possibilities are endless. I don't know exactly like what I would say would cut and dry what it would be. But I think that the Tufts right now, they cover the same topic areas that the Well covers. And so this is just another facet for us to have a mirrored approach from the pro staff to the Tufts program. You know, I think that if we were ever to do like a mentorship program, like when we first started it before, the idea was maybe to incorporate a leader from the Tufts program to be the facilitator. And so I think there's lots of opportunities. And yet again, I go back to that big piece for me, working with students, the peer educators, is to make sure that this is a learning, that they get learning opportunities from this and get some skill sets. And I think this could be an opportunity for that. They can enhance their facilitation skills. I think honestly, there's probably some crossover with mentality into the other topic areas that we cover. So like, what's the intersection between that and mental health? You know, how does coping strategies affect or is being affected by mentality and, or like the man box or masculinity or gender roles, right? And so I think that there's a lot of areas where the Tufts could cross over this topic area that we haven't really thought of yet. And that's, I think, where part of the magic is with involving them into that process. And so I think those would be some of the areas that I'd be interested in seeing them do in the future. And some of that is a little bit about their passion areas, but also just like presenting them the opportunity to do that. And so I think that's where it'd be interesting to see where we can go with it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for, we absolutely agree. And we also hope to get to that point one day. I know Magnus, being a psychology major, he was very much interested in the intersection of mental health and masculinity. And the conversation that we had with Dr. Archie and Logan Chapman was phenomenal, really spearheaded by Magnus, and you could see the passion that he had when we had that conversation together. So I definitely want to continue. It would be great to continue to have those intersections and bringing the work together between the Tufts in this project. Speaking more on the impact of the project, how do you think the project can impact the campus community and climate? And overall, what do you think, or what impact just do you think that talking about healthy masculinity can bring to Tulane?
You know, I think it goes back to that community approach for me, that I think the more as our society progresses, there's things that like even from when I was younger, we just never talked about. And I think that by opening the door to have these conversations, we're leaving the next generation better off, right? What I'm noticing is like my mom is a second grade teacher. The kids that are in her class are talking about things that like I don't think I ever talked about in second grade. And so I think as we need to mature our areas in these topic areas, so that when they do come to college or they're higher up in societies, they can make big change. And so I think that that's what I would be looking forward to seeing within the community here at Tulane, is yet again bringing this to the forefront and having those conversations. I think we talked about, like, you know, Magnus gets really excited when he talks about his major, but the why do we do things, right? Like, I'm a science person as well, thinking about the biological, right? So there is some, I think we were just talking about this with a coworker, there is some things that happen biologically, that you were born a male, biologically born a female, and that there's some things deep rooted based on that biology that are assigned characteristics of those humans. And so having those deeper conversations and truly understanding the why behind them, I think that we can then move and project into different areas. One of the things that I think is really important in general for our students is understanding why they do the things that they do, or how they can make a difference in the world. I think that also leads back to that mental health piece. Like, we can heal ourselves from some of the things that have been happening in past generations or in our current generations if we better understood ourselves and why we do things. And so I think that our Masculinity Project lends really well into that. If you understand some of the biological, the science, and then how you take that information and proceed and walk in the world. If we had that within our conversations here at Tulane, I think we just like could shift the narrative on a lot of the things that we're doing. And I think that our students could probably take that information and apply it in ways that we can't even really see, because once again, we're not living their lived experiences. But I think it goes back to that, just a community approach. The more we talk about certain topics and we're empowering our students and educating them, I think they can make some really big changes on our campus. And I know I keep saying that a lot. I don't know why, but that's like the big thing. Is just I think they can just change things on our campus way better than the rest of us. And so I think our jobs are just to open those doors, facilitate those conversations, and maybe even push our students into a place where maybe they're not comfortable talking about it yet, but we bring them to that uncomfortable place and we talk about, like, you know what, it's okay to be uncomfortable, but let's move past that part and talk about why is it uncomfortable for us, and then what can we do with that information to make things on our campus better.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's been a common theme in these conversations we're having, is like the students have the ability to create change amongst themselves and their peers, right? And can receive help from the staff and faculty. And I think that's where we come in, is providing opportunities to have the conversations or learn about the topics.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, what programming or what more would you like to see the Mentality Project do at Tulane, in terms of like reach out and connecting with students, but also professional staff members and faculty?
I'm a really big component in mentorship, and so I think it could be extremely interesting if this would phase back into another cohort model. I think there would also be tons of faculty and staff on this campus that would not only benefit the student, but it also benefit them from being in a position where they had mentees. And I think that goes to the overall culture on our campus to creating a change. I find that a lot of the work that I do on campus also leads me into being a mentor to someone. One of my other best parts of being, working at Tulane is being a posse mentor. I think that being able to spread that type of programming all over our campus, I just don't think we realize as pro staff how much we can affect change in our students. I think back to my experience in undergrad, a lot of my best moments were because of my advisors or the friendships that I built on campus, even in my most darkest days. But in order to make some of those changes, there was a person there. And so I think that if we had more of that on our campus, not to handhold the students in the process, but just to be that person, because not everybody has that in their life. Or, it was my first time going to college. My parents didn't have to do loans or things like that. And I think just having someone to bounce those ideas off of, it'd be interesting to have it stem in mentality, but see where it could grow and affect the change on campus. Because once you have those connections, students come back to you over and over again with even what seems to be, seemingly small things, but they find that trust. And so I think the mentorship on our campus could build that trust, and then help with our community building. So I would say definitely maybe excited to see mentorship.
Noted, for sure. Okay, we're pretty much almost done here. Just have one last question for you.
Excellent.
How do you think a Tulane student could be a positive role model against unhealthy masculinity and against violence on campus? And what do you think are some skills that one can work on just to be a positive model of healthy masculinity?
I think the one big thing that our students can do to be a positive role model in this is correcting behaviors or toxic language in the moment. I think that they definitely underestimate the power of their own beings in these spaces, and that if our students felt empowered to do so, just speaking up, even if you hear something. You know, I think it goes back to a lot of like the bystander language that we talk about. Just yeah, just doing that, I think is really the big thing. I think the skills that are needed for that is just maybe a little bit of confidence, but also just recognizing that sometimes our power in words means so much more, and also our actions. That, you know, I think back to, you know, kind of like when we were in high school or elementary school, they talked a lot about like bullying and all of that, right? Like the same concept. You never know when you intercept something like that, who's watching that and how that affects that person. And so I think that if our students, which I think a lot of them do, just living that motto of being a Tulanean, if we look out for each other, that could, I think, would definitely help with a lot of the things that are happening within this topic area. And so I think that's the greatest way that they could be a role model, is just actively being a part of it, choosing to engage in the process, and then, you know, finding other ways, researching or talking to folks like you all and talking about what they're passionate about and coming up with new ways to have these conversations.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Before we end our time with each other, do you have any last words or messages you would like to share with anyone watching our Mentality Monday conversation?
Yeah, I just, you know, thank you guys for reaching out. It was a joy to be with you guys. And thank you so much for your hard work on this topic area and, you know, opening the door for the conversations with our students and empowering our student leaders like Magnus to take a role on campus. I don't think we say it enough to our own staff, and appreciate you all for all the hard work that you all do. So yeah, thank you so much for letting me be here with y'all.
Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it has been another great Mentality Monday conversation, and thank you, Letitia, for joining us. We look forward for everyone to watch our conversations and stay tuned for our next episode as well.
Thank y'all for watching. Bye.